All right, welcome everybody. My name is Blair Fix. I'm joined again by Erald Kolasi, and today we have decided to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, because of course it's everywhere. And just before we get going, I have to get a rant off my chest, a semantic rant that I think many people share, which is that I really hate that we're calling it artificial intelligence. I think that's hype. Um, and I hate it in the same way that we use the word technology or tech to refer now to Silicon Valley. Because in the broad scheme of things, every tool that we use, humans use, is technology, right? So it's not really fair to lump in computers and specifically now software and call that tech, even though, of course, that's what we do. And in the same vein, I hate that we call neural networks and large language models in particular, AI, because they're just an extension, in my mind, of computers and software, which we've been using now for what, 70 years? And I would prefer, if we're going to use the word AI, use it for really everything we do with computers, because the moment we started writing programs, we were creating little artificial intelligences, very narrow ones, obviously. And what we have now is just an extension of that. But anyway, that is my rant off my chest. Thank you for listening to me, Erald, and everyone else. But perhaps we should start with just have you found any uses for this stuff? The LLMs or any of the AI stuff, Erald?
Yeah, if you're asking like me personally,
I am, yeah.
sometimes like I found it useful at exploring different topics or subjects at which I'm really like not an expert,
Mm,
and just somewhere where I have like zero baseline to start with, right? Like if I wanted to know just basics about like knitting, I think, asking, ChatGPT or like Google's AI overview, some questions about knitting might actually help you just orient yourself as to like what things mean and like why are they called that and things like that. I will say AI is kind of like useless or potentially dangerous in subjects where you're more familiar with and already have a strong opinion, right? So there, you have to be more careful and critical. You should be critical in all situations, but one thing I have really liked recently, especially with Google's AI overview, is they're giving you the sources now
mm,
that the AI system is essentially summarizing,
hmm.
right? So I really like that because then I can actually go back to the background source and then see what that says and question that and scrutinize that. So I've been doing that a lot. So I think that's one way in which I use AI, and then um,
It's essentially another form of Wikipedia, a first entry into a subject.
yeah, yeah, I've found that it's very useful as like a first entry, into a subject. Now, again, just like Wikipedia, you have to use it carefully as well, right? And you have to corroborate it with other background sources and hopefully, somewhat reputable sources. So, you shouldn't fully trust it, obviously. But I do think for a lot of tasks like that, it's pretty useful.
Hmm.
In
And
terms
I
of,
spend a lot of time in high schools, and I will say that so the kids under 18 now, that's their default. If they want to search for something, it's AI search first, not your old school, Google search where you just have a list of web pages. So that's their go-to. It's not my go-to yet. I have turned off the AI. I use DuckDuckGo, and I've turned off the AI assistant. I just it's not the way I usually think. Usually I'm looking for specific web pages. But I agree, learning about new subjects, it is nice to have a quick summary. Even just facts. Like what is fact X? It's nice to just have that up there at the top of the search with the caveat that it might be wrong. I guess that's the caveat of the it goes for the whole internet. Any other applications that you found useful?
Yeah, not really. There's some things that, people are trying to do at work, but it doesn't really impact me in particular. So like
Hmm.
at work, it hasn't really been, anything that I'm using yet in
And
any way.
what kind of work are you in? I mean, you're trained as a physicist, but what is your day job right now?
Generally in finance is my day job. But yeah, but in my particular line of work, we don't really use AI systems much, although there's people exploring different ideas, right, about how it could be used.
Hmm.
So at work, it doesn't really impact me much. And yeah, outside of that, it's funny because it's one of those things that you hear constantly about, right? That's what everyone's talking about, AI, AI, AI. But it's not like it's revolutionizing our lives just yet, right? Like I
Yeah. Well,
feel
let's get to
confident.
that. Let's get to that hype or the lack of overall impact in a bit. I want to stick on the actual applications, and I think the theme will be that they're quite modest, really. Here are some ways that I've found AI or just LLMs useful. One is transcription. So a while ago, I participated in a podcast discussion with Michael Hudson and Jonathan Nitzan and Tim Denuzio, and we had agreed we'll transcribe this discussion. And so I used this open transcription tool called Whisper. I think it's from OpenAI, and it was actually really surprisingly good, like at catching even niche Marxist words that I had never even heard of that came up in the discussion. Even some pump, it actually did good punctuation. The caveat with this, though, is that as I was wading through the transcription, about every 100 lines, maybe a bit more than that, it would completely hallucinate several sentences, which is very jarring to come up because they're it hallucinates them in a way that they're plausible. They sound like the rest of the discussion, but then I'm reading through these and going, this what? And then so that that's the caveat with all these LLMs is that and anything based on an LLM is that they're probabilistic. So it's not literally just faithfully reproducing what's on the page in the way that a decade ago I was using voice transcription software, and at the time it was pretty rough. Like it would make quite a few errors, just not catch your words right, but it wouldn't hallucinate. So that's really the trade-off is that those old programs were error prone, but the error was predictable. You knew it just kind of messed up a word. It wouldn't make things up. And so I would say that this transcription software saved me a lot of time, but it's not, revolutionizing my life. I couldn't just let it go and say that this is the final product. That would be disastrous.
Yeah, yeah, and transcription is a great example of what is being used by businesses as well, right? Like to record meetings and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You're
But this
absolutely
is
right.
not, this is like not world changing.
Yes,
So
I
it's
don't.
just, yeah,
Yes, I
saving
agree.
a bit of time. Great. I like that. Monotonous work. Get rid of that. That's fine. Another use that I've had, that I have, which again is small quality of life, is that I run a photo app, a self-hosted photo app called Photo Prism, and in it has some fairly modest facial recognition, which means if you tag people, then you can search for their faces. And I've used that a handful of times. It's kind of nice if you're trying to collect some pictures for a specific person. Again, small quality of life improvement, something that I could have done just scrolling through my pictures, but it saves a bit of time. Um, and other than that, I write tons of code. I have not used it once for coding because number one, I write R code and I know what I'm doing. So the coding is never the problem. It's conceptual problems usually, or conceptual solving conceptual issues, which I want to do because I want to understand what I've done. And so that the actual writing of code, it wouldn't save me any time. But I've told that for novice programmers, it's helpful. I found no use for it there. Do you do any coding?
Not, a little bit, not so much anymore, but you know. what you're talking about is sort of, I think, the next wave in the AI evolution that at least the Silicon Valley tech CEOs want to push, which is, from generative AI to agentic AI. So this is where you have AI agents, autonomous systems that are accompanying you in your daily tech life and helping you get tasks done, right?
Well,
So
Zoom just advertised one to me. So I signed in, right? Some sort of AI assistant on Zoom. No,
It's
thank you. But
it's going everywhere now. Yeah, they're going to try to make this the next big thing, right? For banking and finance, code agents, like you were talking about, writing agents, all kinds of agents to help you kind of again handle your digital life. Uh,
hmm
Fact. And then, at least as Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO, tells it, the next phase after that is supposed to be robotic AI, right? Where all of this comes together and you have robots that actually have intelligence, which they operationalize and functionalize in a three-dimensional world, like
Yeah.
human beings do, which is what AI right now is sort of weak at. Although making enormous progress still, right, with self-driving autonomous vehicles, and there's been a lot of progress and huge investments in robotics that are
hmm
being.
Have you ever ridden in a fully autonomous vehicle?
I have not, and I would be scared
They're
to.
only really operating in a handful of places, right? San Francisco.
Yeah, like yeah, California and some other places like
Yeah.
out west. Yeah, I would be scared too. But I have a thing just about like a fear of like giving up control to other people. So I'm afraid of flying, for example. So for me, it's less about like the autonomous part and just I have like a thing with control. But the point I was making is that yeah, it's sort of like these different waves that the ruling classes are trying to push onto people and hoping for widespread AI adoption. And look, I think even though right now AI may not have made like a huge splash in people's lives, it is nevertheless affecting the world in many important ways, and the pace and the rate of change is going to accelerate
hmm
uh, over the next decade, right? And there's so many dimensions to this question, right? Like an economic dimension on what impact will it have on jobs, what impact has it had, and will it have on the stock market, and so many other things like that. There's an energy dimension, what impact will
Yes.
it have on the power grid? Can we get all the resources that we need to, scale up
Yeah.
these
Let's
flexible?
get to that in a minute because there's some insanity to this. Uh, at the use it, scaling up data centers at this point in time with the ecological calamity that's going on. But let's wait on that. I mean, there are already. I don't think that any of the massive social changes that tech CEOs are selling are, in my mind, they're not happening yet. But there's still a lot of social upheaval. Um, just in education, I have noticed this. So I spend a lot of time in high schools working as a substitute teacher. And this AI has completely upended how students learn to write essays because basically, take-home essays are can't exist anymore because it's just too easy to cheat with ChatGPT. Just have it generate a wholesale essay for you and submit that. So those just, at least in the school board that I teach in, they don't exist. All the writing now that's for marks is done in class in a lockdown browser. So that's a completely different mindset for the students writing in the moment versus slowly editing, thinking things over, which is how you learn to think, right? I find it very tedious writing, and so if I could, get a chatbot to do it, I would. But I know that writing is thinking, and so this is changing how students are learning, and to me, in a scary way. I don't know how it's going to pan out.
Yeah, exactly. That's another dimension, education and what impact it's going to have there. I recently listened to a talk by Derek Mueller, who's
Yep.
at Veritasium, right, on YouTube. And he was saying that a lot of people always say that new technologies are going to revolutionize education, right? Whether it's radio back in the day or television, or there's so many things that are, or the motion picture. Thomas Edison was predicting that was going to revolutionize education, and the point that he was making is that none of them ultimately end up revolutionizing it because education is a social endeavor where you learn through effort in conjunction with other people. right? So if you're just having ChatGPT write your essay, well, you're not really, that's not education, right? You're not really learning to write an essay. So it's AI is not educating
Right.
you.
And
It's
in a
just
way, it's an indictment of the education system that kids would even want to do that. Like, well, cheating in any form really is an indictment of the motivation level in education.
yeah. So I think, education is another example where there can be use cases where AI can help you. There's a lot of videos out there. You can look them up about an AI system teaching you like how to solve a math problem, right? And guiding you through things step by step. So there's things like that where it can be helpful, right? But, then you have to balance it out against a lot of the threats that are out there as well.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario in my mind is that um, AI continues, or chatbots, let's say, continue the trend of uh, moving to higher levels of thinking. Like if you think about what school was a century ago, it was reading and writing and arithmetic, literally crunching numbers, adding 4 or 5 digit numbers, divide, long division, long multiplication, right? These tedious algorithms, which now you learn. Like my daughter's in grade 4 right now, so she learns it. But then, as I did, but then I've like since literally forgotten how to do these things because I never do it. Right? We have calculators, computers for that, for these tedious calculations, which I think is a good thing. You'd be hard pressed to say that having computers do calculations is a bad thing. And so I think the best case scenario for these chatbots and LLMs in general is that they allow you to move to a higher level of thinking. Because, say, writing code, ultimately, you don't care about the specifics of the language. That's a tool in the same sense that you don't care about, most people don't care about the specifics of how a hammer is designed. You just want to use it. So if you have a conceptual goal, that's what's important, and understanding the big picture, I think, is most important. So if it helps with that, I'm all for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the point to help us, enhance logical and problem solving skills, right? It's, that is the whole movement behind why people wanted to learn programming and things like that. It's not about any particular language. It's, it helps you organize your thoughts, right? How you get from step A to step Z. Uh,
Hmm.
I think to the extent that that's a major part of education, AI can enhance it, but it can also probably sabotage it in different contexts.
Hmm.
So we have to be careful, and I think it's difficult to know how it's gonna play out. But of course, when you're talking about education, there's so many other variables that are also important, right? Like political economy and funding and how schools are organized and things like that, right? Those ultimately, I think, will have a bigger impact on, how well our kids are educated according to certain standards, rather than just AI.
Yeah. Should we segue now to some of the wider impacts, um, perhaps by framing in terms of just the hype that tech CEOs are selling, that this is just going to completely revolutionize society. In my mind, I think of like what the future that they're selling is like Isaac Asimov's robot novels, where there's certain planets where literally everything is automated and the actual population is sparsely distributed and everything is done for them. I feel like that's the vision that tech CEOs are selling. I am extremely skeptical of it, but I want to hear your take.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the vision that they're selling. You've got the CEO of Anthropic, predicting that in the next few years, like 50% of white collar entry level jobs are going to be eliminated. You have surveys from the World Economic Forum saying that like almost half of like business leaders expect to shed jobs over the next few years because of automation through AI. So that is the vision that is being sold. And look, some of that may come true, right? I don't doubt that when you have a new technology, that there are some sectors where you're going to see, labor displacement. I mean, that happens going all the way back to the Luddites, right, in the 19th century with textile workers. So, you could have easily dismissed power looms and steam engines and all of that, but it had massive changes in British factory production for the Industrial Revolution. So this will also have some changes, but then you wonder, how far can they go, right? You can't fire everybody because then who's going to be left to buy products and services to make the capitalist profits, right? So then you hear people talking about, well, we need to give people some kind of, universal basic income to cover the people who are going to lose their jobs and all of that. Um, there's going to be a lot of, political fights over what that kind of stuff looks like and whether it's sufficient and who should get it and why not. So there are aspects of this that could turn into an ugly transition, I think. But ultimately, I think, for the ruling classes, for the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and the Jeff Bezoses, right? Always what they want is control and domination over labor. And I think AI
Hmm.
is just another mechanism of social, political, and economic control in that wider context, right? And control can come in the form of, firing people and reducing labor costs, but it can also come in the form of managing labor costs, right? So reducing people's wages or other things because you brought in more AI. So, this has happened with things that we don't call AI already, right? So, for example, when GPS got into London, a lot of the cab drivers, and especially the gig workers, they started using the GPS systems, and so the London cab drivers, which had to learn all of the different roads in London and where to go and all that, they were out of luck, right? So there's a lot of this automation which is going to.
So sociologists just jump in. They call that de-skilling, and it's not new, right? It's not all forms of automation are kind of de-skilling, and it basically lowers your bargaining power, whoever's doing that job.
Yeah, and we've had yeah, exactly, and we've had automation in human history for centuries, right? I mean, you could
Hmm.
argue thousands of years,
Hmm.
and people still have jobs today, and typically that's because what happens is when new technological systems come along, then people are trained to use those systems, right? And so they start working on those systems. You
And
can
the
jump.
systems create new problems, and
Systems create new problems that you have to solve, right? So, if you bring the robots on board, well, somebody has to supervise the robots in case they break down. And eventually you'll design robots that can like repair themselves or something, but something will go wrong, right? Then you'll have to put in a new battery pack for the robot or something. Like there's something that you have to replace where you need human input and human supervision. But the problem is, as a general abstraction, that's fine, but in the concrete reality of everyday life, it is going to cause a lot of displacement, economic dislocation. Some people will lose their jobs or see reduced wages, and that's going to in turn then create a lot of political instability, right? Just like the Luddite movement did in the early 19th century. So that's an element of this that I don't know where we're going. But right now, the hype is there. It's driving up stock market valuations. People think that AI is for real, and I do think it's going to have a lot of big changes in certain economic sectors. And look, one thing I did want to say about how we got here is we've come a long way, right? Like 60, 70 years ago, in the days of like symbolic AI, where you had these like pretty elementary AI systems that sort of work with a top-down layer of control. So you had rules, you had logical rules, and you had the data sets, and you
yes,
had
a classical program, right? Just
yeah,
yeah.
like translating from one language to another. That was symbolic AI. Didn't get you very far. And then you had the rise of neural networks, which were theorized all the way back in the 1940s by William McCulloch and
Mm.
Walter Pitts. And then, but the problem was that the computational power wasn't there to really get
Hmm.
a lot of oomph from these artificial neural networks. You needed a lot more computational power, and that's why the early ones failed and went nowhere, like the perceptron, right, which was a major disaster in the 1950s. So fast forward a few decades, we did get that computational power, right? We got accelerated computing from NVIDIA and others, and now we're at a point where we have so much computational power that all of these matrix multiplications that these neural networks rely on can be done very quickly. And as a result, neural networks have now produced everything, right? AI chatbots and self-driving cars and all the things
Hmm.
that we're
Yeah, this
talking.
is a funny this aspect of technology fascinates me how there's applications that we never think of. So you know, the first GPU is basically doing matrix algebra to for graphics, and the realization that really what we want is massive parallel computers. Before that the computers were basically we want to make them faster, the CPU faster, more calculations per second, and then this switch with GPUs to slower speed, massive parallel computation. So just putting these computations out into like now I think like thousands and tens of thousands of different little cores. So that's really interesting how this, it comes out of rendering graphics, but now any sort of matrix algebra turns out to be exactly what you need for these AI training models and running them. So that's fascinating. Going back to the classic AI, it really reminds me actually of Noam Chomsky, who I'm a big admirer of, mostly his work in political economy. But his job at MIT, ostensibly starting in the late 40s, he was funded by the Department of Defense, I think, to come up with basically they wanted translation. They wanted to automate translation, and he said, "Listen, I'll come up with this theory where under all languages there's just a universal grammar." So that was his thesis, and he got funding for that. But as I understand it, this basically turned out to be a dead end, certainly in terms of translation. In the end, it was what do we do with translation? We just literally throw data at the problem. You throw millions and millions of words at a neural net and train basically curve fit the thing with billions of parameters and then throw massive data centers at the problem. And that's how we solve translation. So that's really interesting. Um, so this vision of unending or automation of everything. Okay, let's assume that goes ahead. The problem that I have with it is that we have is really the biophysical or just material aspect of it, which just completely is mostly ignored in the mainstream, which is that all technology, to the extent that it does something useful, augments human labor or replaces it, needs energy. And so AI is exactly the same. We have massive data centers running training these models, running them. That's the bottleneck, I feel like. Like we can't ramp up energy consumption continue forever. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on it. But one place where I'll start is what you're hearing from a lot of people is, a claim that, data centers worldwide, they only consume like 2% of the world's electricity, right? And so they're not really, going to add that much more, energy demand to our global systems. And so, everybody kind of like needs to relax and realize that, yeah, AI is going to push up energy use a little bit, but it's not going to fundamentally change anything. And, you know, I, uh, I really don't like this way of an energy accounting, and I talk about it in the book. This way of, thinking in terms of primary energy consumption when you have some unconverted sources of energy, and then you convert them into a secondary form, and then a tertiary form, and then you count the total primary energy that you used. And the reason why I don't like it is because in reality, economic systems are filled with conversional devices like computers and cars, right? And power plants. So just devices that convert energy. And the operation of any of these devices is fundamentally interdependent with the operation of other devices, right? So to get your computer to work, you need the power plant to work. To get your car to work, you need the somebody to pull up the oil and transport it with a tanker to the gas station and all of that, right? So so that's why I call economic systems conversional networks. And once you see how energy actually moves around the economy, how it's delivered, how it's deployed, then you begin to appreciate a lot of the upstream and downstream effects, which are not currently appreciated, I think, in the current debate. So, the energy use associated with AI is not just what data centers are doing. First, you have to build the data centers. Then
Hmm.
you have all the extensive supply chains to get the devices and the equipment into the data center. So take NVIDIA's chips, right? The Hoppers, the Blackwells, all of those. Well, where are they coming from? Well, the tooth fairy is not just creating them out of thin air. TSMC is building them over in Taiwan, right? So TSMC is using a lot of energy. And where is TSMC getting a lot of the equipment, the specialized equipment, like the extreme, lithography machines, right? Extreme UV lithography machines that it needs to complete the semiconductor process, right? To build these tiny semiconductors.
Printing the chips.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's getting them from places like, the Netherlands, ASML, right? They build the EUV machines, and it takes ASML, three cargo planes, 40 freight containers, and like 20 trucks to just transport one EUV machine to TSMC in Taiwan. So that obviously is using a lot of energy, right? Because to put the freight containers onto the merchant ships and the freight ships, well, what do they run on? They run on diesel engines because most industrial vehicles and machines run on diesel engines. So there's a lot of fossil fuel use associated with it, right? So the
Mhm.
point is, once you understand the global economy as a sort of interconnected energy network, whether you want to call it a superorganism, the way people like Kerry King and Nate Hagens do, or
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it, it's a complex system. It's a complex network, and you can have very nonlinear effects when you try to change something over here on all of the background factors over there, right? And that's, I think, what is not appreciated in the current discussions about, well, AI is not really going to add a lot more to energy use. I actually think we don't fully know right now what the full impact is to global energy demand because of the rise of AI. But I bet if you were to trace back all of these supply chains, and somebody would need to do a whole PhD on this, right? Like
Mhm.
probably multiple PhDs because it's not an easy question to answer. But I
Yeah.
bet the final result will be more than 2%. So it does worry me, right? I mean, considering the scale of the ecological challenges that we face, and I've talked about them, on many other forums before. So I'm not going to bore people with that now. But considering the scale of those challenges, right now you're throwing this new energy intensive system into the mix and having it diffuse very widely. You have companies like Meta opening up, three natural gas plants in
Mhm.
Louisiana with like 2 gigawatts of capacity. And you have Stargate with OpenAI and SoftBank in Texas with over 1 gigawatt of capacity. And you have Elon Musk going to Tennessee and Memphis and
Yep.
building, again, these huge data centers, these mega clusters, consuming vast amounts of energy, requiring so much energy to build. Then again, you have the extensive supply chains. You have a lot of complex downstream effects when people use these AI systems. It's kind of crazy, and that is something that scares me just as much as, if not more, as the economic dimensions of this problem, right? Like the,
Yeah.
the, the
I
job
think
dis
it scares me more too. Let me
uh,
give you two scenarios about how this plays out the way I see it. Now, backing up, when 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was in grad school, we were all, or not we were all, I was quite interested in peak oil. It was kind of a fad at the time. The idea that the rise and fall of industrial society was the peak was imminent, and it was just purely driven by oil in the ground, conventional oil, which is going to peak, and we're going to have this collapse, ensuing collapse. So I was thinking about this in 2012, and obviously it hasn't panned out, largely because there's a lot of unconventional reserves that we have started to use, and just the thinking of it, it was too simplistic because technology has a tremendous effect on the how we use energy, and we can invent technologies that basically render previously unusable energy sources into usable sources. So there's no simple way to say this is the amount of energy in the ground, this is how much we'll use, and we'll fit a nice little bell curve. So anyway, though, the big picture here for human society is that we cannot continue to use fossil fuels. So I see two, maybe three scenarios. The first is that there is no other technology like fossil fuels. There's no substitute, which means that if we switch to renewable energy, it is going to really limit the amount of energy that we can use, probably drastically less than today. So we are going to have some sort of peak and then leveling out. And in that scenario, I don't see how we can have an AI build out because we're talking about what I would call degrowth or just decline in material consumption. So I struggle to see how we're going to have these massive AI effects in that future. The other, you know, that could go horribly wrong though. Say AI, we get this massive AI build out. It's going to be driven mostly by fossil fuels because that's the most potent energy form we have, and it's we're going to have a really high peak, and then the higher the peak, the faster the collapse. So we have just this calamity. And then the third scenario that I'm is basically Star Trek. We somehow invent nuclear fusion and energy constraints just disappear. And AI, we get a massive AI build out way beyond my lifetime, and it looks like Star Trek. I don't think that'll happen, but these are the scenarios. Where do you see things playing out, or what are your thoughts on these scenarios?
Yeah. Well, let me say as a physicist that even if we master nuclear fusion, that doesn't mean energy constraints go away. We'd
No.
still, you still need deuterium and tritium and other things. And tritium is a critical scarce input into these fusion reactors. But that's a whole other conversation. I've written about it before. Yeah, so anyway, fusion reactors aside, because I don't think nuclear fusion is going to save us in the end. I do think, you bring up a lot of interesting scenarios, and my own hope is that what happens is, humanity kind of sees the light and we have a carefully politically managed, drawdown of our energy use, resource consumption, and waste generation to like a different level of dynamic equilibrium in effect. So if you want to call that degrowth, that's fine. In my book, I call that Valerism, right? So switching from the capitalist trajectory of growth that we're on to one of bioenergetic stability. So that is sort of my hope among the scenarios that you outlined. Now, I think there are a lot of interesting dimensions to this question. So one thing I want to emphasize is that although it's true that fossil fuels have been absolutely central to the rapid energy expansion and the rapid expansion in the energy scale of the global energy system over the past 2 centuries, nevertheless, we are seeing rapid additions with renewable energy. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, has consistently underpredicted the rate at which like wind and solar would come on. Like in 2015, I think they under predicted new solar PV capacity installations by like a factor of 10, right? They said
Mm-hmm.
5 gigawatts, it ended up being like 50 gigawatts or something. And you're starting to see, even in places like the United States, a rapid expansion in the battery storage market. So, in 2019, it was like 900 megawatts of capacity for battery storage. Now we're up to like 26 gigawatts. So that's an over 2,000%, growth in like, 5 or 6 years. So you are starting to see, I think, rapid build out in renewable energy. You're also starting to see more electrification of industrial vehicles and machineries, right? So, whether that's in rotary blast hole drills or, tandem rollers or excavators, there's a lot more electric powered things now coming on the market. Years ago, I used to mow my lawn with a gas powered lawnmower, and now I use like an electric weed whacker like everybody else does, right? So I think there are some positive trends, but at the same time, the positive trends are not happening fast enough, and they're not happening at the scale that we need.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, one of the worries, that I have that if we keep trying to, aggressively push the transition to renewables, but we don't make any cutbacks or downscaling efforts elsewhere, then it's going to be very energy intensive. Energy intensive. It's going to generate a lot of waste. It's going to cause a lot more thermodynamic instability in the biosphere, as I've argued elsewhere. So I think there that is the context in which I am worried about the diffusion of these AI technologies. And as I've explained before, whenever you have the diffusion of, for example, NVIDIA's chips, it's changing the whole ecosystem of technologies in these data centers, right? So once you put in more advanced chips, then you got to put in more advanced network switches and cooling systems and
Mm-hmm.
all of that takes energy.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what worries me, that we're going to end up expanding both the scale of renewables but also fossil fuels, since so much industrial capacity is locked into fossil fuels right now. You know, um, that even though we are seeing amazing progress in renewables, and the Chinese battery maker, CATL, they've announced that in 2 years they're going to have batteries that can power small commercial aircraft, which is amazing. It's crazy.
Hmm.
So the pace of technological progress is amazing, but the scale isn't there. And once you throw in a new behemoth like AI,
Hmm.
then going to cause a lot of other changes to technological systems throughout our economies. I am worried about these butterfly effects, right, with AI. Very
Hmm.
worried about them. I've, written, talk about them in the book and other places. So that is definitely a worry that I have is that we're going to get this transition entirely wrong. And one of the major reasons is AI. Um,
Yeah, I worry about it too, in the sense that um, capitalism, in capitalism, the point of technologies is to earn a profit, obviously, new technologies, not to ask whether these changes are socially beneficial. So, looking at the history of technology since the Industrial Revolution, many technologies I think are beneficial just in the sense of eliminating drudgery. Just look around your house, right? At washer and dryer, washing or dishwasher, all the the little the pieces of technology that they're not new. They're all probably 70, 80 years old that just take a lot of the drudgery out of household work. And I wouldn't personally want to give them up if I would do it grudgingly. If we determine that, human society can only live at a far use far less energy than we do now. We have to give those things up. I would do it grudgingly, but I like them. With AI, I'm less sure that it's going to deliver true quality of life improvements. What I see now is literally managers drooling over the fact that they can just save money by getting rid of certain types of jobs. And already you look inside big corporations, and there are tons of jobs that are just not socially beneficial. They exist because they, somehow benefit the corporation's bottom line, or just because management says they should exist. I don't know. But this is my worry: is that we leap into this world but tech companies can make a profit off it or think they can make a profit, but it doesn't really benefit humanity. But it comes with a huge material price tag. And that is my worry, big picture worry.
Yeah, material price tag to our quality of life, economic impact, which is again still uncertain. And you're right, this is being pushed by the big tech companies, right? The hyperscalers, as they're known, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles. They're the ones building out these huge data centers, pouring in enormous investments in capex, hundreds of billions of dollars in capex. You're seeing a lot of vertical integration now. For a while, the American corporate business model kind of moved away from vertical integration. Now it's coming back with data centers as these hyperscalers actually own the data centers and want to be very much in direct control of the power generation and the systems that are working in these data centers. So it's really is an elite driven push, right? And I think that is absolutely clear. And they see the dollar signs, they see the profits. As Marx argued in the 19th century in Capital, just because you have automation and more machines coming on, that's not going to reduce your work hours. No, capitalists are just going to find new ways to exploit you so that they can be more profitable. Once they introduce this machinery. So, and we're going to see, I think, something similar with AI, right? It is going to present new ways for our corporate tech overlords to essentially control what we do and how we do it at work so that they can be more
Yes.
profitable.
And really not to the benefit of anybody. So here's an example that I think many people have heard of now. A couple weeks ago, was it the Chicago Tribune published a review of summer books? It turns out that it was an AI generated article with hallucinated books, non-existent books. So this is an article that literally doesn't benefit anybody because it's just garbage. Um, and this is so why do we have this happening? It's because, well, journalism is already just, under pressure, immense pressure. It's been collapsing for decades. And this journalist in particular was interviewed and he said, like, listen, I can't, the pay that I get per article is just minimal and I need to pump out so many of these. And so, of course, I use AI and it went wrong. And these are the sort of pressures that we don't want. We don't want garbage information. We want high quality information. Same thing in science. Like to have AI generated papers polluting the publication record. Nobody wants that. It is a testament though to poor social pressures. The fact that everything in academia runs on publications that hardly, nobody reads, nobody wants to read, they just want it to get cited, right? And so
Yeah.
these are not things we want. It's literally wasting energy dumping out shit that nobody wants just because the social pressure is there. And that worries me.
It worries me too, and I think what you're talking about highlights the enormous risks that come with AI use, and corporate America has discovered many of them already. McDonald's last year actually canceled a drive-through program where they had an AI, voice-generated system, essentially taking your orders, and they had it trialed it at about like 100 locations. Turned out to be a total disaster. You had these like videos on TikTok showing people like telling the AI to stop adding orders. There was one video where it added like 260 orders of chicken McNuggets. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You had Zillow a few years ago using AI systems to project home prices, and like the AI system did a terrible job at that. Zillow
Hmm.
overpaid for a lot of homes, lost a lot of money, fired half its workforce, you know. And you had on the more funny side, you have things like Microsoft's Tay back in 2016, which was an AI chatbot unleashed on Twitter. It was meant to like converse with Twitter users and become more
Hmm.
adept. Instead, within a few hours, it ended up spewing racist, you
Hmm.
know, hateful nonsense because a lot of users just pumped it with racist right-wing BS. But that's the story that a lot of people know. The story that a lot of people don't know is that Microsoft also unveiled a chatbot in China, similar kind of concept to Tay. And in China, it actually did a lot better. And that's because, the political controls on speech in China are much greater. And so the internet is sort of a saner place. And
Hmm.
so you can actually train a chatbot to like be like a something of a normal human being, like what a normal human being would be like. But in America, because the internet, social media is so polluted and there's so much nonsense
Hmm.
out, this thing was targeted and turned into like a racist right winger take with it. So it just highlights like the impact of social environment too in training these AI models. And going back to risk, the general point I want to make is, there are these things called AI scaling laws, which are used to make an argument to the people in power about why we need so much investment in AI, right? And so the AI scaling laws are supposed to be these empirical relationships and observations which say that you can really boost model performance by throwing in more computing resources, right? So expanding the size of your data, throwing in more GPUs in there, right? More reinforcement learning, things like that. And there's different kinds of scaling laws. There's the familiar ones, pre-training laws. There's post-training laws. This happens in the context of after you've built the AI system, it starts interacting with human beings and getting better, right? And then there's test time scaling laws. This is, you know, um, an example of this, like Noam Brown recently argued, if you just give AI a little bit longer time to think, it can actually improve its performance substantially, right? So instead of giving you the answer in 0.5 seconds, if you let it give you the answer in 1.5 seconds, it can improve its performance. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the people in power, what they're hearing from their, programmers and software engineers is that there's these AI scaling laws, and that if we just keep more investment, if we just keep buying, hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA's GPUs, if we just keep building out these data centers, right? If we just complete all of have these massive data sets, get the entire internet or whatever, IAI systems will get better. And I think there's a lot of real limits to these AI scaling laws, which is going to affect the performance of these models as well, right? So one of them is the human generated data is finite.
Hmm.
Um, Now people are saying, well, you can get around that. You can, this is what NVIDIA is trying to push. You can have synthetically generated data. So you can literally have AI systems
Nothing could go wrong with that.
generating data to train other AI
Hmm.
systems.
Hmm.
To go into private data is what a lot of people are arguing, right? So
Hmm.
go around from the public data like Twitter and all the other data sets that are used to train these things. Um, so but even if you do that, there's a fascinating paper from 2014, scaling laws do not scale. And what they argue is that like, you can get all the data in the world, but there's always going to be subgroups and subpopulations for which these AI models are going to be really, really bad at. So
Hmm.
to give you one example, there was an AI system a few years ago that was trained to, look at faces, at human faces, and determine whether it's a man or a woman. And it turns out that the AI system could do this pretty well if the people were white, but once they saw, more black women, they had a much higher error rate at
Hmm.
identifying like black women, and that's because the data sets on which they were trained on were biased in some sense, right? I mean, ultimately, these data sets, no matter how big you get, not everybody even uses the internet in the world. Most of these data sets don't even use the entire internet. They'll use like, X or social media platforms, right? Where only a small percentage of the population actually is. So there's all these like biases, and what happens is once you deploy these systems in the real world, they make a lot of stupid mistakes because they just carry they're very brittle in effect. Even neural
Hmm.
networks are
Hmm.
still, they're not brittle in the same way that symbolic AI was, but they are brittle in many specific contexts where they have to perform. And so if you look at, naive metrics of performance, when you have your small evaluation data sets, if you look at their mean squared percent or mean squared error, right, or their mean absolute error or their cross entropy functions for like classification tasks, the results might tell you, wow, these models are really good, right? But then once you actually deploy them in the real world, a lot of them make stupid, stupid mistakes,
Hmm.
as these companies have found out, right? All the examples that I gave, and there are a million others which we haven't covered.
Right. Well, the glaring flaw in all of this is that language is a very um, it's only a subset of human behavior. It's an evolved behavior that we use specifically for social interactions that we're not really even aware of all the things that go into are behind it, right? We interact with the world as evolved creatures in a very complicated way that we really have no cognition about. And to have to have a really useful AI, in my mind, it needs to act like some evolved creature, which is experience with the world, an evolved experience with interacting with the world. This is completely different than a sample of human language because human language lives on top of and is an abstraction of all the material interactions that we have. And it's an abstraction that we aren't even really aware of because we make connections between words and actions that are just automatic for us because we're evolved creatures and this language is something we've evolved to describe the things that we do. And so there's this whole other layer of um, biological experience that in my mind these large language models have no access to. And that is a fundamental limitation. If you want what the tech CEOs call general intelligence. I don't really like the word, but let's use it. If you want that, what you need is machines that evolve and interact with the world. They can't just be scraping the internet because they'll never get down to these lower levels.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you just said. And, that's sort of what they're hoping for with robotic AI, right? That's why they're going to rely a lot on synthetically generated data to train these robotic systems because there's just not enough data out there. But I think the point is that, um, precisely because of what you said, right? Human beings were biological creatures. We're born and interact in the context of a three-dimensional world. And those interactions have an enormous impact on our cognition, right?
Hmm.
And on our cognitive tasks and functions and the way we understand the world and the way we act in the world. And AI ultimately will never be able to replicate a lot of that because it's not human, right? It doesn't have our biology, it doesn't have our physiology. And so
Hmm.
you can throw it all the data sets in the world, right? The entire internet and five internets after that. But it's still going to have, enormous, ridiculous blind spots. It's still going to have, make silly mistakes that human beings would never make. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, it's going to get a lot of things right that human beings would never get right,
Hmm.
right? So it might have a better, ability to for cancer screenings, right? It might be better than doctors at that. So it'll do a lot of things. It'll do a lot of
Right.
things.
Which, in a sense, is kind of trivial because there's already for 50 years been many, many things that computers are better at. Just literally calculations,
Yeah,
billions and billions of times faster than humans. We don't even think about it anymore. So these are not earth-shattering in that sense. That's just kind of taken for granted that machine-driven intelligence is going to be able to do certain things better.
exactly. And to a coda to that is right. So they're amazing at pattern recognition, right? And that's what neural networks and deep learning, that's what they do very, very well. But you know, human beings, of course, we don't just recognize patterns in the world. We're capable of self-reflection and thinking critically about our actions and about our world and what we should be doing. And we can do so in a way that is, entirely different from the way AI systems are trained. We don't need massive amounts of data, bombarding us. We just need functional interaction in the world. And of course, we need our unique biology and physiology, which is so important for, processing, handling those interactions and leading to cognitive
Hmm.
development. That is ultimately what gives us, again, it's a phrase I don't like too, but general intelligence, the ability to be adaptive and learn different tasks, right?
Hmm.
That's why I can learn chess and how to play soccer and do other things, right? Which an AI system can't do. You can make an AI system way better than the best chess players in the world, and we have plenty of those by now, like AlphaZero. And you can make an AI system like AlphaFold, which can tell you protein structures, and it's uncovered like 200 million protein structures, whereas in the past 60, 70 years, we only uncovered 150,000. Right. So AI will be very, very good at pattern recognition and even have some generative capacity in these highly specific tailored tasks.
Hmm.
The extent that you can get like a system of general intelligence that can hop back and forth between the ability to do different things, that's where I'm highly skeptical about. And
Hmm.
I think the scaling laws are definitely going to hit limits
Hmm.
once you go to that level.
Yeah, I think so too. Another area that I would like to touch on, again, it's a social area, which is that fundamentally, as social creatures, we want human interactions. We want meaningful, high quality interactions. And to the extent that AI substitutes for that is ridiculous. So, like Zuckerberg saying you're going to have an AI therapist, just I think ridiculous. What is a good use of AI, in my mind, is the logistics of everything we do in the world. As technology gets more complicated, there's more and more logistics, which is interhuman communication, often mediated by machines, and sometimes completely mediate, just machine to machine. To the extent that you can automate that metadata drudgery, just like there's all kinds of just meaningless tasks that happen whenever we have data sets. This data set doesn't interact with that. Oh, I want to schedule with my dentist and their calendar app is different than mine. Just all these kind of interaction things. That is a useful application of AI in the sense that you keep the human interactions high level and meaningful and get the drudgery automated. Great, but that doesn't seem to be, for the most part, what these tech companies are trying to do. They want to just have you full on get rid of the human element, and it's all AI. You're going to interact with AI, which to me is a nightmare.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, great observation. I think that is what they want, like max ultimate dependence on AI systems, right? So that they're everywhere around us. And so that in effect kind of becomes our reality. You might remember a few years ago, Zuckerberg talked about the metaverse,
Hmm.
right? This virtual reality world that we were all going to inhabit with his different characters. And it ended up being a total caricature, a total joke, the way
Hmm.
they developed it. But I think what they're going for now is sort of a different variation, a different version of that, where the metaverse is all of these AI systems that are surrounding our lives and on which we become fundamentally dependent to the point where we think we can't live without them, right? Kind of like the internet or some other system. And so, because of course we can't live without them, then we need the subscription services and we need to
Hmm.
pay all up the wazoo for everything. And that means more ka-ching for Meta and Zuckerberg. So I think, yeah, that is ultimately where this is heading. And Obviously, I worry about then the impact which it would have on human psychology, on
Yeah.
human sociability, our ability to interact with one another and grow as human beings, obviously on education and other things. It's a very, very scary world if we go in that direction.
And yeah, I think the word the from Veblen, sabotage is important. And I think about the this all the time. So when you get on the phone to call a company, say it's your internet provider or whatever, everybody I think universally is thinking, what is the fastest way that I can talk to a human? I want to talk to a human. How can I get there? So what you're doing then is you have this rigmarole of is it, pressing numbers, talking to an AI, trying to get to human. And then the company, on the other hand, they're basically sabotaging customer relations because they want to save money and saying, how many people can we not get talk to an actual human? So they, you know, never get to an operator. So this in my mind is a nightmare because I've never had a problem where I called into a company and had it solved without talking to a person. That's why I call. If I wouldn't call if I found the answer on the internet. And so this is, I think, just it's hilarious and sad and just so annoying.
It is. I've had the same experience. I've never had like an AI chatbot or or an AI chat system solve like a problem that I've had because the problems that we have very often are highly unique and specific, and
Hmm.
they require human intervention, right? And
Because
so
you've already done like the internet search. I have this problem, and you wouldn't call if you found the solution online.
yeah, and it gets back to the issue of, general intelligence and adaptability, right? These AI systems, they don't have that adaptability to handle all of these highly unique specific cases. Now, some people will counter by saying, well, look at companies like Lemonade, right, which is like an online insurance marketplace, and there you go on Lemonade and you can get your car insurance or whatever you want through an AI system, right? And it's pretty efficient, but at the same time, Lemonade also has human backup because the AI system has limitations, right? So you can't remove the human element altogether. So yes, there's some things that you can automate here and there, but at the end of the day, I think sabotage is a great word for it. It's a way to boost profits, to kind of make life harder for the rest of us. But ultimately, I think yeah, to just get us used to all of these AI systems being around our lives.
Hmm. A more trivial example of this is just the way subscription services, Amazon famously makes it very difficult to find the unsubscribe button. And in the same way, you bury whatever call-in center, you just make it almost impossible to find the actual human. So these are annoyances. They're not existential risks. But let's maybe now pivot to the risks of AI. We're not talking about it as much these days, or at least I find that it's less of a theme. But a couple years ago, especially with the what is the word? The effective altruists. They were really worried existential risks from AI. What is your take on these? Is this just completely hallucinated?
Yeah, so I mean, if what you mean by existential risk is something like, the Matrix,
Or
where
Terminator? Yeah. Yeah.
or Terminator, right, where the machines have taken over and humans are just like little bubbles in some chambers providing electricity. So if that's sort of what you mean, I don't see that happening. I don't really see that as the fundamental threat. At the end of the day, this is an argument you've made and
Hmm.
others. AI systems, they'll need energy in order to operate, so they have constraints too. And it's very easy to sabotage a lot of those energy systems if they think they want to take over the world, right? And remember, at least right now, we can act in a three-dimensional world in many different ways than they can, right? So
Hmm.
ChatGPT is very good at the English language, but ChatGPT can't shut down a power plant, doesn't even
Yeah,
know.
it can't get out of its data center.
So,
Yeah.
right. So it's now. if you have the rise of robotic AI, and depending on how far that goes, you could have crazy scenarios. I mean, ultimately, I think it's impossible to predict, but it's not something I worry about. I think more than anything, it's kind of a distraction from the more fundamental issues of AI that we've talked about, right? Like the economic risks, the energy and ecological risks to the biosphere. I think those are the more central risks, right? The domination of capital over labor, and the changing nature of work that will come from AI, and our dependency to AI, right, and all the fundamental mental health and psychological issues that could have uh,
Hmm.
for us. I think those are the more serious practical risks. I
Hmm.
think worrying about AI taking over, yeah, I think right now it's mostly just a distraction.
What about the critique, and this is a very old critique, that of losing certain skills. And so, for example, if you go to school now and you use ChatGPT all the time, you don't learn how to write. Now, this is a very old critique of technology that I think dates to, if I'm not mistaken, Aristotle, or one of the Greek philosophers who didn't like writing because he basically thought writing, you can record your knowledge and then forget about it. And he worried that that would basically harm your memory, which it probably does, but I don't think that's a bad thing. So, are you worried about any sort of loss of skill with a reliance on AI?
Probably not as much as other people. I mean, we've lost a lot of skills with the rise of technology, right? Like, cursive, handwriting, right?
Hmm.
Well, my parents do cursive a lot better than I can.
Hmm.
Uh, my handwriting is absolutely terrible, and I think that'll continue getting worse and worse for people, over time, right? As we rely on a lot of like tech systems. Um, I do worry about us losing other kinds of skills, like skills related to emotional intelligence,
Hmm.
right? And ability to connect and empathize with people. I think, there's a lot of research and evidence now about the dangers of social media and what it does to people's psychology, and how it can sort of alienate you from friends and, other people, and just from the social world that humans normally live in. Um, I do worry about that a lot, and maybe those are not like formal skills in the way you were asking the question, right? Like the ability to do specific tasks, right?
Hmm.
But they are different and very fundamental other kinds of skills, for just growing up as a well-functioning human being in society, who can help others and who people can rely on. And so I think I am worried about AI, yeah, balkanizing us and creating pockets of isolation. And um, another risk that we haven't talked about is, the geopolitical risks. I think there's enormous things there, because now it's become kind of like a tech rivalry between
Hmm.
China and the United States. So I'm worried about that. But yeah, so I think what I'm worried about in terms of skills is, you know, losing the general ability to think critically.
Hmm.
About that, I'm worried about what it will do to our emotional intelligence and psychology. I'm very much worried about that. So I'm worried
Hmm.
about it harming those kinds of skills, and not so much like, oh, we're going to lose the ability to program, or nobody has good handwriting anymore, or things like that. I'm not so much worried about a lot
Hmm.
of, to a point, like depends what skills you're talking about, obviously, right?
Yeah. Well, I think who knows what will happen. It's hard to, if I think about my education and just the lack of information I had as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old when I was, say, learning first year, second year physics, I literally couldn't find the answers to problem sets. So we had no choice but to think through. If we're presented with a set of problems, you had to think through it. And now today, you can get the answer, and this is not new to AI. You can just Google any kind of generic physics problem, and the answer will be somewhere on the internet. So it takes a level of self control to not look at the answer and to actually think it through. And I worry that when you're that age, when you're young, you don't have that self control. Now, I have no evidence to say that this is going to harm people's ability to solve problems, but it certainly changes it uh, because you always have the option to not think it through uh, in this scenario. And then just bigger picture science, like not you and I are, but we're both trained as PhD in PhD programs. We happen neither of us to work in academia right now, and I think we both agree that academia is quite dysfunctional. And we have this problem of just pumping out information that literally nobody wants to read. And that's the nightmare of AI. And it's what it's most capable of, these LLMs, is pumping out information that nobody wants to read. And it's just purely a token, for citations or whatever. And best case scenario in my mind is this completely upends academia. Worst case scenario is that the scientific literature just becomes completely polluted and useless. So I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this earlier. There's already been some evidence of a lot of AI generated articles going into scientific publications with like
Yes,
this.
and it's harder to detect now. Early on, there was a kind of a tell where they said that the AI would say as of my last knowledge update, which no lo- that tell doesn't exist anymore. So, but it was they could, that was no researcher would ever write that. So that was a tell that this was AI generated.
Yeah.
But that's a general concern of mine, is that we just pollute our all of our information with things that nobody wants to write and nobody wants to read. It's just completely garbage.
Yeah, I mean, I share that same concern, right? The loss of creativity, pumping out useless things, and I will say like I think part of the concerns that you mentioned, I think they've sort of always been around in different variations, right? So like if you're a student, working on a problem, you probably before AI, you might have looked at, the internet, right, to try and get you the answer. Or before that, you might have looked at, the textbook sometimes has an answer, right, to certain problems. And so, you might look there. And I think the point is that like if you're willing to put the effort in a coordinated social environment, you can get good results in education, right? Even if you have some external help. So it's like it's okay for a few problems if you want AI to like guide you through it,
Hmm.
right? Just to kind of get a general idea of what's going on, right? Or if you want to use some other resource. A lot of kids, what they'll do is they'll ask parents, right? When we
Hmm.
all did it when we were students, we're very young students. So you can do that. But at the end of the day, then you have to go in and put in the work yourself. You have to put in the hours yourself, right? It can't just be relying on this external system teaching you how to think, because then you're not going to learn how to
Hmm.
think. You're just going to learn certain, rote patterns that you got from this system, but which may not be widely applicable in a lot of the situations that you're actually going to face in life,
Hmm.
whether it's in educational settings or in more professional settings, after you graduate and go on. So yeah, to the extent that it ruins human focus, attention, effort, right? All of
Hmm.
these fundamental characteristics. This is what I was talking about earlier, because ultimately, cognitive tasks and cognitive functioning, it's built up from all these more fundamental faculties, right? So you need focus, you need attention, right? You need motivation, you need some kind of intrinsic motivation to learn.
Hmm.
You're actually going to understand things.
Yeah.
And to the extent that AI sabotages a lot of those things, and I think in many cases it is doing that, it could be dangerous. Now, for some people, AI might make them more curious about certain things, right? So it might help them, but I think there's a lot of challenges for different institutions, from education to businesses and corporations, um, about again, this I go back to this issue of dependence, right? To what extent
Hmm.
do you want people to be dependent on these systems? Because what happens when the systems fail and break down?
Hmm.
And we're screwed.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time here. I think that's a great place to end. These are old problems, just the problem of credentialing, people treating a university or any education purely as a credential for, getting into middle class, upper class. That's an old problem. AI is just going to accentuate it. But we could talk about this literally for days, and we're only at the beginning of the AI quote unquote revolution. So I think we'll leave it there, Erald, and we'll talk again soon.